The Forest is an open-world, first-person survival horror game where you find yourself as a plane crash survivor on an unknown island surrounded by nothing but mutants, cannibals, and nature in and of itself, looking for your child who was taken by those very same cannibals. Releasing in early access in 2014 on PC, and then later for PC and PS4 in 2018 as a full release, The Forest took its place as one of the greatest survival games of all time, not only for its horror aspects, but also its great co-op gameplay. Today's video, however, is not about The Forest, it is about its sequel, Sons of the Forest, coming out later this year. So without further ado, here are the top 10 things you absolutely need to know about Sons of the Forest. Up at number 1, let's get the technicals out of the way now. Sons of the Forest is releasing May 20th, 2022 from the developer Night Studios, and unfortunately as of right now it's only coming to PC, mostly due to the fact that it will be an early access release. Unfortunately, this video finds you with a bit of bad news, as originally the game was set to release in May of 2022. It has, as of just the end of last month, been delayed to October of 2022, with unfortunately no exact release date at this time, but a pretty good ballpark time frame and something that I think fits the game overall. Now, with no specific release date in mind, we don't know if this is subject to change. I'd like to err on the side that with a window, they can later decide which exact day they want, and that leaves it to where hopefully there won't be another delay. All that was really said alongside this delay was that they were overly ambitious with their May 2022 release date, and ideally that just means that they're still in the final crunch of development, but they are getting to the final touches and just needed a little more time. Up at number 2, let's talk about tech and visuals for just a minute. The big thing that I took away from some interviews that I found online was that photogrammetry tech is being used, something that even AAA developers like Bethesda are just now using for Starfield in their first game. Of course, this isn't completely new, but it is something that is taking the industry a lot of time to adapt to, and it's nice to see smaller studios take on to this as well. Pretty much, if you don't know what that means, is that the developers can go into real world and scan real items. For instance, they give the example that instead of handcrafting the textures for a tree stump, they can go out there and scan it and have a much more realistic and lifelike version of a stump in-game. That's not the only thing they had to say about textures, however. They did mention that there would be some placeholder items and reused assets in certain trailers that more than likely would get overall refreshed or completely removed by the time of the game's launch. The game is being developed by what I can assume is the most recent version of Unity, along with some other landscaping tools that they do mention that make it really easy to streamline the process of making the open world. And this shows as all 3 trailers really make the world seem very filled out and very realistic looking. But a few other things that I did notice before I move on to number 3 are items like snow deformation in one of the trailers, as well as fish going up the streams and waterfall, and even the degradation of trees with little wood chips falling off as you hit them really make the world seem way more believable this time around. Up for number 3, I wanted to kind of talk about the character who's featured in all 3 trailers for the game, and her name is Virginia, or her code name is rather. Virginia seems to be afflicted by the same things that most humans that are mutated in this world seem to be, and she has multiple limbs and multiple arms, but she seems to retain some form of consciousness, or at least humanity, as she, for the most part, seems to be following around the player character, potentially even helping them defend the base later in the game as she develops a little more of her own acuteness to guns and things like that. The developer did say at one point that the Sons of the Forest game originally was a different project that was super AI focused, and I almost wonder if the pairing of the player character with Virginia as an NPC, which there are no friendly NPCs in the first game, was actually what that game originally was. But don't worry if you're super worried that she's going to be a really annoying character that you're going to have to feed and take care of on top of your own self. You can actually do whatever you want with this character outside of what some people just thought when I said that. You can scare her away if you want to. You don't have to have her around. You can leave her behind, or you can keep her and build your friendship with her to some degree. All we know for sure is that she does not give you quests. Up for number 4, let's talk a bit more about the world that we're going to be spending time in for just a moment. The map itself is about 4 to 5 times larger than that of the first game because we're taking place on a different island this time. The actual name of the island is irrelevant, but this is considered Site 2. Think like Jurassic Park, how the second movie they're like, oh no, there was a second island the whole time. Well, it's the same thing here, and it was hinted at pretty heavily at the end of the first game. Surviving on this island seems way more difficult, not only due to the survivability of facing off against increased intelligence of AI, but but also due to the fact that there are dynamic weather and seasons in this game. For instance, if you survive for so long, you're going to have to deal with those harsh winters more than likely. And the engine they've made has made it to where you can accumulate snow and ice and things like that. So you're really going to want to be careful where you build your base and the strategic advantages of that. Again, other than the small little drawn map, we have no idea exactly what the island looks like, but it's very reasonable to assume that it could have changed over development. The only other bit of information I can glean from the trailers is that there will be a return of the cave system, which was integral to the first game, but also that there are plenty of bunkers this time around as well. And that leads me right into number 5, that there are new gameplay mechanics in this game. First off, there's digging. As you can see in the trailer, there's a shovel. It's not completely clear if you can dig anywhere you want to perhaps build a trench for defenses, or if this is simply in certain spots where you can find, say, a patch of loose dirt, or dirt that looks different, and maybe find a secret. Though in the trailer what we do see, however, is the player digging up and uncovering a bunker, which is where they find another new gameplay mechanic, which is the 3D printer. While I'm sure the original crafting system in this game remains intact, I do believe that the 3D printer adds a new level of gameplay. As you can see here, that the character is making a mask, and it shows on there how much resin it costs, as well as how much resin is there, which you can find through tree sap and things like that throughout the world. So it makes sense why you're still able to craft things. It also shows on their crafting time, as well as the color. Here's where I believe the color comes into play though, however. I believe color is how you're going to be able to blend into different types of cannibalistic tribes. You see in one of the trailers there that one of the tribesmen is wearing a certain colored mask, and the player character is wearing a mask over his face and not being attacked. I believe to blend in with certain tribes, you need to have certain masks on you at all time. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's kind of like Majora's Mask, the Forest Edition. Up at number 6, while I've talked about plenty of new things in the game, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the things that are being improved. Of course, visually, that's one thing, but I've already talked about that just a little bit, but I'm talking more gameplay. Crafting overall seems to be more animation-based than before, where before you would lay out a blueprint and only bring the resources to it, and they would just fill in as it is, which was very satisfying to look at. If I'm being honest, it was very unique then. It now seems that the character will actually take the time to chop the wood to make it fit into the blueprints. Very interesting. Another thing that is promised to get a full upgrade in this game is the melee combat. Unfortunately, they've been kind of not showing any in the new trailers, I believe on purpose, so as to show more of the gunplay rather than anything, showing new things to old players and new, to get them kind of drawn in, of course. It is said in one of the interviews that they did overhaul the melee combat to facilitate better hitboxes and more responsiveness, as well as more gore when you're actually hitting, as well as a degradation system for presumably the enemies and how they get hurt, as well as potentially even the weapons you're using. Overall, though, it sounds like End Night is just shooting for a more immersive experience, and I cannot fault them for that whatsoever, and any time they need to take is great. Up at number 7, let's go ahead and actually talk about the gunplay for just a minute. As a huge fan of the first game, I would say that guns run the risk of making this game feel less like a struggle to survive and more like a shooting gallery. However, that seems to be not the case, as promised even by the developers themselves. Even like the first game with the flintlock pistol, apparently in Sons of the Forest, ammo is severely scarce, and using ammo, while very effective, as we can see in the trailer, the cannibals actually do fear the gun once it is used and they see what it can do. It's not something that we're always going to be able to rely on, at least not consistently. Perhaps we can craft more bullets later in the game, other than what's found around wreckages and things like that, but it seems that between the shotgun and the pistol, and even the crossbow, for instance, that is shown in the trailer, we don't have a lot of ammo, and it's something that we can either use to make an easy-to-survive situation better, or we can save it for potentially like a boss, which we can talk more about that in just a minute. So overall, the thing I have to emphasize here is that don't worry that guns, while they can be very cool and their animations do look very slick, aren't going to ruin the original experience of the Forest. It's still a horror game. Winding down at number 8, I want to talk about the enemies that we actually do see in the trailers. Now, I know this isn't the craziest way to start this section, but I really appreciate that they were able to get the shark inside in the caves. That adds so much to my fear. Obviously, this water is going to be attached to the ocean, so maybe there's an ocean entrance to caves now. That's really cool. But my point is, imagine going through the caves as it is. It's creepy enough when you know you've got mutant babies jumping around trying to kill you, which they're in this game too, it shows. You have to worry about your air, and you have to worry about a fucking shark. Claustrophobia, everything's going crazy. This game is 100% going to be way more scary than the first game. Going off that though, there's clearly some enemies in the first trailer that are blind and seem to be, completely in the caves, only able to detect through sound. It makes sense, and the first game didn't really have that very much. I mean, there were enemies that would detect you that might be able to be stealthed up on, but for the most part, that wasn't the case. We've also got the super grotesque things underground, like two human being bodies jointed together at the hips climbing on the walls, as well as things that look like a gaping dragon from Dark Souls. They don't even have a freaking head, they're just a big mouth. But body horror seems to be really incredible in this game, but above ground, you get a little more intricate creatures. For instance, I'm sure the Virginia will make another appearance, and there are the different types of tribesmen, the ones that are more skittish and smaller. They won't attack unless they have the numbers. You know, think like a hyena or something like that. And then there's this big snake-looking two people combined to be really tall. I don't know what that's about. So I don't really know. This game is insane, and if there's any particular one that you like, let me know down below, and we can kind of go over them together. Finally, at number 9, while it is shown in the trailers, I want to go ahead and say this now. Spoiler alert for the first game. I wanted to save these 2 points for last for that reason alone. Anyways, jumping right in, at the end of the release date reveal trailer, there is something that I can't shake the feeling that the environment shown at the very end of the trailer, where the mutant babies are jumping at the 2 characters, and it seems to be that the player character is on the ground, mind you, so this seems to be a true cutscene. Although the developers, talked about the fact that this usually isn't the case in the game, it's interesting that this is shown in the trailer. It almost makes me wonder if there is a good bit of story to be told, maybe towards the second half of the game, where the first half is more surviving and exploring, but as you kind of gear into the bunkers, and it seems like that's a big emphasis in this, bunkers rather than just caves, I almost wonder if the story is a lot heavier. So forgive me for being a little speculative on this, but it seems to be, as this is Site 2, that maybe this big glob of humanness, I almost wonder if this was another one of those experimental children that didn't quite get saved. Either way, bouncing right off the end of the game there, I did want to bring up for number 10 one thing, and that is the protagonist of this game. And while co-op is confirmed for the game at this time, you can almost guarantee that people joining your game will be another survivor from your helicopter crash and part of your team. But the main character itself, I believe, is Timmy from the first game. The Fight Demons tattoo that we see in the beginning of the reveal trailer is very reminiscent of, some of the shots we get at the end of the first game where the bubbling masses are coming out of him, where he has been infected or mutated in some way during the events of the first game as a child. Now, I believe that with the Site 2 map on the wall and everything, we can kind of triangulate the fact that Timmy wants a bit of vengeance, or if nothing else, answers for what's going on. We don't know what happens in the time jump at the end of the first game. Perhaps everything going on, he accidentally kills his father. This very well could be. Or maybe that's the motivations towards the second game. We don't know. He wants answers. He's got to find another facility, and even if he can't get to the first one, perhaps the second facility might hold the answers that we need. And I believe that's what we're going to find in the second game, whether that be something along the lines of a cure or potentially shutting it down as a revenge operation. But I think somewhere after the crash, we're going to come across Virginia, the character, and I don't know exactly how that's going to go. Maybe it's going to be a strained relationship at first, but I think at some point it would make sense that we find out that this is another child that went through the same things that we did and perhaps didn't turn out so well, didn't get saved as early or anything like that. And that's why I think that the relationship will be there for the character to kind of infer, and perhaps later on we can either cure her or we will have to, deal with her in some way if she becomes worse. And that's a pretty good idea for me. But anyway, guys, there's the top 10 things I believe you need to know about Sons of the Forest releasing later this year. Between the imminent release date, with the incredible graphics and new emphasis on heavier AI, I believe this game is going to be incredibly good and deliver exactly on the promise of the first game and then some. Let me know what you're most excited for about this game, or if there's any other games like this that you'd like me to talk about. For instance, I've already done videos on Atomic Heart, and I'm sure I will have linked a little tag at the top of the screen for that throughout this video, as well as other games like The Day Before, the open world zombie survival MMO. Let me know if you check out those videos as well, and thanks for watching. Bye.